I'm going to read a few statistics. This is pretty recent stuff in the last couple of years, for the most part. And if you, by the way, didn't pick up one of these, they're in the back. And the little guide in the side is just an outline. It's very sketchy. There's a lot more to it than that, but you can take notes or whatever, write questions. This is not me talking to you. I know that there's a lot more experience in here and a lot more wisdom in here than what stands before you, because I'm not. So I would really welcome you to raise your hand and just speak out when you have something to say or something to add to what we're talking about. Let me read you some statistics and some research that's been done fairly recently, and I want you to tell me when we're done what this tells us and what we know, okay, what we can conclude. The number of Americans who do not identify with any religion continues to grow at a rapid pace. 1/5 of the U.S. public, 30% or 33% of adults under 30 are religiously unaffiliated today, and that is the highest percentage ever in a Pew Research Center polling. And that was 2012 statistics. Okay? In the last 5 years alone, the unaffiliated have increased from just over 15% to just under 20% in all U.S. adults. That includes teenagers and up. All right? According to George Barna, if you're familiar with him, he does tons of, that's what he does, research on church growth and every kind of, it's really fascinating. If you Google George Barna, you'll see some things he's done. The number of unchurched Americans approached 1 million in 2007, and now I think it's pretty safe to say we've topped 1 million since then. Hartford Institute for Religion Research said the total church membership reported in a 2012 yearbook is 145 million plus, which is down 1.15% over the year before. This is just the broad, anybody who considers themselves church-going people. Okay? The specific was, in the 2011 report, Churches of Christ had 1.6 million people. They did not report, I don't know what's considered in that, this is just what it says, but there was no update, so I don't know if it went up or down, frankly, between those 2 years, but it fell from the 16th rank to the 16th rank from the 15th. Does that make sense to you a little bit? That's as detailed as I could get with that. And the last one, according to Barna Research, only 3 out of 10 young adults from college age range to young adult remained faithful to a faith family at all during their young adult years. That's not saying we're not going to get them back, but it's just saying 3 out of every 10, through those college years especially, remained faithful to an organized church body. Okay, now, so here's my question for you. What can we conclude from that research? Is it good news or is it bad news? Hello, I kind of baited you on that. What is it? It's not, there's nothing encouraging about that, is it? And you go, please, be more positive. I am. I'm positive. That's not good news, okay? There's nothing about that, and there are some things that are good. There are some statistics that are encouraging, but those aren't some of them, okay? Now, so why is it bad? If you, in your own words, without using numbers, tell me why that's bad news, what I just told you. We're losing our young people. We're losing some of our older people, frankly. Okay, and not just us, but just faith across the board. Okay, so what about that title? You go, hey, that's a pretty negative title. Why are you being negative about dumbing down? You know, first of all, what do you think it means when I say dumb down? What do you even think about? What words do you think about?
Ignorance.
Ignorance.
Not being grounded in the truth.
Not being grounded in the truth. That's good. Love. We're going to hit on all of that. Okay, these are some things I jotted down. Settling, reducing, watering down, growing complacent, or taking for granted. I think any of those, you think about sometimes in education, I know we have a few teachers in here, we say we have to dumb the curriculum down sometimes. I hate that. You know, why can't we teach? And here's the thing, dumbing down happens, especially I see it in women. Now, I'm not blaming all those statistics on women. We know there are a lot of factors involved. Okay, this is not the fault of women or anything like that, but this is actually going to be, I hope, encouraging and motivating and empowering, because We have a lot of power when it comes to the future of the church. Okay, we've been given a whole lot that we have influence over, and if we start being a little bit more or a lot more articulate and intentional, that's the word I really like. If we would be more intentional in our homes and in our churches and in whatever our spheres of influence are, there's no telling. And those, I think, at least in where we have control over things, I don't think those statistics have to be what they are. All right, here are, I looked up actually, what does dumbing down mean? Which you can find anything in Wikipedia. There's a whole article in Wikipedia about dumbing down and where it came from and all that, so you can just look that up on your own. But I took that definition and tweaked it just a little bit, what they said it was, and I know Wikipedia is not reliable, but here it is anyway. We're making up, definitions anyway. Deliberately diminishing intellectual life, and we're going to add to that spiritual life. Oversimplification or underestimation of critical thought to the degree of undermining. Okay, now, this room is full of smart women. I think you see enough in that to know that pretty much hits the nail on the head for the kinds of things that we're talking about. Okay, and I would add in a very practical sense under that, not taking advantage of spiritual opportunities or not digging deeply into the Word. All right, so that's kind of the groundwork, that's the definition, that's what we're starting with as far as this goes. Okay? All right, so our purpose today is not to leave you feeling bad about, the world and where things are, the state of affairs, and, in all of faith families across the world, but here's our goal: to embrace our God-given place as women in the kingdom and use our spirit-led spheres of influence to strengthen the body of Christ. All right, I would like to zero in on those two blue words. Okay, first of all, I think there's a spot under your page for this. Embrace our God-given place. As women, we are providentially equipped to nurture faith. God wired us that way, to be nurturers. Okay, and we do. Who does the child want when something happens? You go to mama. Okay, so God has wired women to be nurturers, and it doesn't stop with just those things. We're also nurturers of faith, and we need to do it intentionally and not just whatever happens, but be pointed and be intentional about that. The second word I just want us to draw a little attention to is this spheres of influence. That's really why I asked those questions at the beginning. Okay, I wanted to know where your sphere of influence is. Okay, you've got children. I'm sure some of them are young. Some of them may be grown. You're not finished, are you? You never are finished really being a parent, I don't think. And by the way, the jury's out on my kids. I've got a 16-year-old who just started driving like 2 weeks ago, and a 12-year-old. I do not stand before you telling you that I know all the answers, because I don't. This is just a topic that I'm passionate about, and I see, that we've got some room, maybe all of us, to work on this, myself included, and that's why I'm standing up here. Okay, any one of you could probably teach this a lot better than I can, but we all have spheres of influence, don't we? I can remember a few years ago when I was a stay-at-home mom, we were living in Texas, and I can remember praying about having influence. Okay, now I knew even at that time I have influence over these two girls that I have. But I think about, how long has that been? 14 years ago, 14 years down the road, I think of every Monday night being in this very classroom and having students. I think of, the kids I teach at Mars Hill every day. 40 girls right now are meeting in a Bible class, and I have the opportunity to teach them every day. 40 senior girls. They're about to leave high school. They're going to go their separate ways and go to college, and I think that's a tremendous opportunity, and I have a sphere of influence, and I'm not going to take one day of that for granted. But it's easy because I feel like I've got a limited time with them. The end is in sight. It's easy, I think, when it's your child or your niece or your grandchild, okay, to feel like you've got forever and to not be intentional, and the days go by and they turn into weeks and the weeks turn into years, and have we been intentional about what we're talking about? I totally didn't mean to say most of that, so that's exciting. Okay, let's talk about biblical basis for this. Here's a verse not very well known. Some of these are ones, go-to verses that I think you could probably quote, and I don't know if everybody has Bibles, but I would like to read as much of this because you can't really have a lesson about not dumbing down and dumb it down. So I'd like to go straight to the Word here. Isaiah 55, this is Isaiah, but he's speaking in verse 8, Isaiah 55:8. That passage ends with declares the Lord, and then I'm an English teacher, the quotation marks start again. So this is really the Lord speaking through Isaiah. Okay, and in verse 10 he says this, listen. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out of my mouth. It will not return to me empty, and will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. What does that verse say to you? First, we've got a natural thing that happens, right? Thanks to God. Snow and rain comes down. What does it do? Replenishes the earth. It's not going to come back. What it says right there in 10, does not return without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish. Okay? And the comparison is set up between that and what coming down? His word. Okay? And it's going to do the same thing, right? What does it do? It's not going to come back to him before it waters and flourishes the soul. And here's what I take from that. Okay? We're his vessel. We're his mouthpieces, right? And whatever sphere of influence you have, and the words that he has given you, the word that he has given you, will not return to him void. Okay? All we're responsible for is putting it out there, right? And doing the best we can to influence positively anybody in our sphere of influence. That's what that says to me. And that gives me a lot of confidence that it's not in vain, right? And it's not up to me. And he's going to bless it. And that's something that he's put into place and he says he's going to do. What my job is to be articulate about that. And when I said articulate earlier, I hope you didn't get visions of, women telling everybody how to do things. I didn't say bossy. But intentional in speaking the word. Okay? When a friend asks for advice, are you, a talk show host to her? Or are you giving her godly counsel? That's what we're talking about. Okay? That's a sphere of influence as well. Okay? Not giving her popular culture answers to things, but giving her godly answers to things. That's not dumbing things down. All right? 2 Timothy 1:5, before we go there, I should have asked this question first. Do we have biblical examples of this sphere of influence thing? Of course we do. Turn to 2 Timothy 1:5. Who is it going to be? Yeah. 2 Timothy 1:5 says, I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded now lives also in you. And it goes on to say, fan that flame. Okay, so there's our first biblical example of really passing it on to the next generation. Okay, grandmother Lois, mother Eunice, you got Timothy. We know his influence throughout New Testament times. His father was Greek, probably not a believer at all. Don't tell me mothers and grandmothers don't have power to affect change in people's lives, because they do through the grace of God. All right, Deuteronomy is loaded, and your handout actually has more verses than this. Let's go to Deuteronomy. These are verses that some of you can probably quote. Deuteronomy 4, 9, and 10. This is so convicting to me. Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen and let them slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when he said to me, assemble the people before me to hear my words, so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land, and may teach them to their children. Something I wanted to point out about that was, if you think you're done as a parent, and you go, whew, goodness, got those kids grown and raised and married. Well, and then it says, and their children. We have a responsibility to the next generation. I have a responsibility to my nieces and nephews, to my friends' kids. That whole, it takes a village, it takes a church, it takes all of us. You think back to the people who've been influential in your lives. Yes, my parents were very influential. My grandparents were very influential. I had aunts and uncles who were influential, but I had Sunday school teachers that stand out to me. I had teachers. I went to a public school, but I had teachers who I can remember having and making comments and saying things that it registered with me and it resonated years later. And so don't underestimate the power, again, of your words. Let's look at some more in Deuteronomy because it is packed. Flip over to a few chapters over to 6, chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, very famous verse here. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. It should be, this tells me, it's not okay, we're going to sit down and have a Bible study. That's fine. That's a great thing to do. But as you go, every opportunity you have, and it can be simple things. I can think of the girls being little, and we might be riding in the car, and I would say, can you believe that sunset? Isn't God good? Can you believe He would do that? And just natural things that would make them think about God and make it be a natural part of our lives. Flip over a few more chapters, chapter 11, verse 18 through 21. Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land that the Lord swore to give your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. Okay, very similar passage there. 1, 2, 3. Is that all our Proverbs, Deuteronomy verses? Look at Psalm 78. I think I really, really like this. Psalm 78, 1 through 7. O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things, things from of old. What we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us, we will not hide them from our children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law of Israel, which He commanded our forefathers to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. We're going to 7. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget His deeds, but would keep His commands. You know the part that sticks out to me. What is it? The children yet to be born. Okay? Are we that far thinking that we're thinking about the children yet to be born growing up and teaching their kids? And are we laying some groundwork right now for that? That's good stuff right there. What about Joel? We don't use Joel very much. I hope you can find it in the back. Joel 1 verse 3 says, tell it to your children and let your children tell it to their children and their children to the next generation. That was about actually something bad that was happening, having to do with locusts. Okay, but the principle there, to pass on the good and the bad, because in all of it we've learned something. And maybe we've become wiser, or maybe our children and our grandchildren won't make the same mistakes we did if we would talk and be real with them about things. Okay? So there is obviously a biblical basis. I probably didn't have to elaborate on that point, and you probably agree with me to begin with. Okay, unfortunately, we don't have a recipe for this, right? If we did, those statistics wouldn't be what they are. Because I think most parents who have some kind of faith themselves want to pass it on to the other. But we live in a very loud culture. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think that's one thing that's changed a lot in recent years, is how loud the culture is and the messages that our kids in particular are getting. But when I say kids, whatever your sphere of influence is, it may be a ladies' Bible class at your church, whatever it is, the culture's loud for those people too, and it's loud for all of us. Okay, so here are just some practical ways. I see these 4 things as very distinct things. Obviously, though, we have to set the example. Okay, one book I was reading, I like the way they said it. They said, get it inside of you and then get it inside of them. Spiritual realities are caught more than taught. A strong spiritual legacy is modeled, not mandated. It's not going to happen just because we want it to. Okay, we've got to do some things. You know, God's going to ultimately give the increase, but we've got to plant some seeds and we've got to water some seeds in our lives, okay? So in what ways do we set an example? The kind of example which I know you live right, you know, you attend services regularly, those kinds of things, but can you think of other ways we set examples? I teach high schoolers, I'm quiet in silence. Yes?
Well, I think, you know, with all of that, you have to be diligent. You know, the challenge is to stay the course. You know, I was fascinated by the topic. I was like, so this is a women's class. Shouldn't this be for everybody? You know, because I have seen, I've seen it in the church where, I mean, I see that happening where there's a lot of, where knowledge is repressed, in a sense, maybe not intentionally. And you have to want the word so much yourself that you are diligent to seek God for yourself. It's easy to get discouraged as, you know, as women, depending on where you are. You know, I know where I've come from, it can be very discouraging to gain knowledge. I was listening to Dwayne earlier, you know, it's like an indictment to not use what you know. But there are some circles that you maybe find yourself in where you may not be able to share it as much, and that can, for me personally, can keep you from being as diligent as you should, because you kind of feel like, well, why should I? You know, and when you talk about go further than just living right, you have to be diligent in studying, and that's something that can taper off really easily with just the slightest little flicker of discouragement that you kind of lay down, you know, what you need to do.
You know, life is hard. It's hard for us at all stages. It doesn't matter where you are in life. Life is hard, and so what are we going to do with those bumps in the road? Because I think we teach a lot of lessons in those places. And how are you going to stay the course and not lose heart in all of those times? That's something that we really just need to pray about, I think. I've got a list of some questions that I thought of when I think about setting an example, okay? How do we respond to crises? Do we look any different than the world looks? Do we wring our hands and go, what are we going to do? And seek out all the world's answers to all of our problems? Because if we do, what are we offering our kids? Or what are we offering those ladies in our Bible class? Or what are we offering anybody, those girls that I teach? Okay, it's not in the outline, but the curriculum that I'm supposed to be teaching in this girls' Bible class is Job and Proverbs. Okay, don't think it didn't cross my mind. What am I going to have to lose? What lesson am I going to have to learn in the course of teaching this class? You know, spare me from that, whatever it is, okay? And here's the story, and it might not be over. I don't know, but my dad has had some heart issues since I've been teaching the class. And I've made 3 trips to South Alabama, all the way down to South Alabama, and 2 weeks, let's see, what is today? It'll be 3 weeks ago this coming Monday. We went down for a heart cath, and they called us out of the waiting room, and the little guy's name tag said chaplain. And I was like, here we go. Like this, here's a huge, our lives may be about to change. And they said, you know, while we were doing the heart cath, he coded on the table. Okay, in that moment, if you don't have it, I mean, you're not going to get it at that moment, you know? And that was one of those moments that you really, it just is still, it's in my head. I know where we were all standing. You know, you've had those times too, okay? That's when you need a faith to sustain you. But I got to come, and he's fine. He came home this weekend. I went back down there for that, and he's doing really great because, you know, he is. And thankfully, when that happened, he was surrounded by doctors, and they just, you know, took charge and took care of things. But I got to come back and tell those girls, I got to come back and say to them, you know, girls, if you don't build a solid foundation, when those moments come in your life, you're going to fall apart, and you may fall apart even with faith. Okay, because they're hard times, and to be real and to be honest with and authentic, I think, with 18-year-olds, you know, that was a huge blessing in all of that they got to see me go through something. And it may not be over, but they've seen that journey, and I have to hope that I was articulate with them, and I was intentional with them, and I shared enough with them that they, I hope, see some goodness in that and some strength in that. Okay, let's move on though. How do you spend your time? How do you spend your money? How do you vote? Don't want to get political, but you know, all of those things are real decisions that you make every day that reflect who you are, and they send messages about what you believe and what is a priority in your life. Okay, do you pray when you need real world answers? And do your children or the people in your circle, do you open up and tell those, ladies that you study the Bible with, or those people in your sphere of influence, do you share when you're struggling with something and just get real with them? Okay? A couple of quotes from one of the books that will be referenced there on the back. A spiritual legacy is influenced far more by parents' actions and attitudes than by the roles and rules of institutions or by repetitious religious practices. Okay? I think if we could delve more into that research, we would find that a lot of those 7/10 of the kids, they haven't seen consistency at home and church, and it hasn't been talked about. I think that there's more there than we can know. A spiritual legacy is a process, not an event. Okay, it's just like spiritual growth if you think about. I can't say that I'm better today, or I'm more focused, or I'm more godly, or I'm more Christ. I can't say any of that, or I'm more humble than I was yesterday. But I look back 10 years ago and I go, oh, I'm glad I'm not there. How much, and so it's hard to measure sometimes, but you set the example, and there is growth because God blesses it. Okay, let's move to the next point. Teach it. Use your words and open your mouth and teach it. Okay, teach it and be okay with delving in. Be okay with saying, I don't know, let's search. Okay, that's all good. Eternal truths are most effectively learned in the home, obviously. Don't relegate it to your church, your youth minister, your summer camp program, your school. Don't relegate it to anyone else, okay? Because ultimately, I've used every one of those things I just named, but they're reinforcements, okay, for what we're trying to do at home. They are not the first line of defense. All right, how might we naturally teach to our children? Because it has the potential to, if you haven't done it before, it's a little awkward to sit down and go, okay, children, we're going to have a Bible study. How can you naturally teach your children? Any ideas? Y'all might have done this effectively.
So just your everyday conversations with them. If they know, if it's in your heart and on your heart, it's something you talk about what you're involved in. You talk about what is important to you. They come home from school, you ask them how their day went. When you see something that glorifies or showcases God in something, or some way that things could be handled better. Any of those kinds of. If your real life examples, if your everyday, you can turn it back into something that from Scripture, or that you've experienced, or that, oh, this reminds me of blah, blah, blah. You have those conversations with your kids, and they can be about biblical things just as much as everyday things.
We have in some ways had to deal with my father because he's stubborn like a child in the last few weeks, and he refused to do those very important breathing treatments after heart surgery that would keep him from getting pneumonia. And my sister said to him on the phone, which this is just an example, even though we weren't necessarily dealing with a child. Exactly. She said, Daddy, it's just like Naaman. And I was like, what? And she said, it doesn't make sense. I know you say, how does this breathing treatment have anything to do, with me getting better or whatever. But you do it because they told you to do it, and they know what's best. Just like Naaman had to dip in the pool, and that didn't make any sense. I was like, see, it's got to be in here, though, before that can come out. You've got to be filled with, because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, and those words are going to come, out of your mouth at those times. And I think the Holy Spirit gives you that. When you need it, He reminds you and brings those things to the surface. Okay, pray without ceasing. I don't know if any believing mom has ever gone very long without a prayer, because it's so much bigger than you are, And so I just say, pray. Pray about the things that haven't even happened yet. Pray about the people who will be influences in their lives. Think about those grandchildren. Think about one day there's going to be a youth minister who's going to minister to those grandchildren. One day there's going to be some little boy or girl to come along and sweep them off their feet. Be praying right now. You don't know their names, and you don't know how it's going to, play out, but it's never too early to pray about things. And then don't be surprised when it happens and it's a good thing. Don't be surprised about that. James Dobson tells the story of his great-great-grandfather's prayer journal that they found, and he had prayed specifically for 4 generations of his family, very specifically. And as it turned out, everybody from the great-great-great-grandfather, James Dobson was generation number 4, and everybody on that side of the family that all of those generations had been ministers or worked some way in ministry. And I think that's not an accident. That didn't happen by accident. There was a man who never saw James Dobson, who prayed for him for generations. That is a great example, I believe, in doing that. My sister's Sunday night small group that they have recently went to one of the public schools in Birmingham and had a walking prayer walkthrough. Y'all ever done that or heard about that? It's awesome. They met in the lobby and they just all went their own ways, and said their own thing. And she told, some went to the locker room, a lot of, bad things and bad moments happened in locker rooms, and some went to just different parts of the school and prayed over the things that would be happening. And she walked down the hall. She said, I just walked down the hall and just every locker, just pray for all those children and everything that they're doing. And some of them would have things on the locker, like decorations or, footballs or whatever. And she said, if their name was on it, I prayed specifically for them. And I'm like, okay, those kids will never know that. It doesn't matter. There's strength in that. Well, one of the little girls' names she recognized. And so she called later that week, she called that little girl's mom, and she said, I just want you to know we did this, and her name was there, and I prayed for her. And that mother said, you do not know what kind of year she's having. It's a middle school, so it's turbulent. And she said she's having an awful year. And I'm going to let her know that people that she doesn't even know are praying for her. There is power in that, and we just need to be a lot more willing to step out there and do something, and let people know, hey, I am praying for you. You're going through some hard times, or this is a rough year, or, I thought about you and said a prayer for you, and there's strength in that. Any comments about that? Anything? Be creative with it. Yes, ma'am?
When we lived in Texas, a couple came and held a seminar, and she spoke to the ladies and so forth. And in her speech, she said, I have 3 boys. And so after it was over, I went up to her and I said, well, you had 3 boys and I had 3 girls. She said, pray for those girls because I've been praying for them.
Doesn't that
For
mean a
my
lot to you?
boys.
And I hope I can say that to little boys one day and go, I've been praying for you, before you were born and didn't even know your name. I think, that's calling them to something else because they're an answered prayer somehow. And there's a responsibility in that for them and some accountability. And anyway, I think we've just missed the boat and we've dumbed it down some a little bit. And maybe we've even taken that whole pray in your closet thing a little bit too literally. I know that the heart of that is don't stand up and just let it be known what you're praying. But it's not wrong to let people know you're praying and that you're praying for them. Okay, because that encourages and that strengthens. Okay, and the last one here is to be intentional. All right. Be proactive, set goals. Have you thought about that a little bit? Don't hope. I think I kind of grew up in those years where the parenting model was to pray for osmosis. That they'll just get it. We're not going to necessarily say it, but surely if we live right, they'll just get it. It didn't work because a lot of the kids that I grew up with are not faithful. And I mean in church attendance, but I also mean they're not full of faith at all. Okay, so let's just not hope that they get it. Let's be articulate about it. All right, here we go, stepping on some toes, my own included. Pinterest is not as important as the spiritual lives of the children or the people in your lives. Facebook, Twitter, I don't know what your thing is. Whatever television show you have to watch. I'm not saying any of that is evil. Most of that can be used for good, and I hope that we all do. But it was ironic because it was on Twitter that I saw this quote today. But Henry David Thoreau, one of my favorite American authors, here's a quote from him that somebody tweeted today. You cannot kill time without injuring eternity. Because what is that saying? If I'm killing time, then that is time that I could be using somewhere else. And I hear a common refrain among mothers especially, about denying. I'm so tired of never having anything to myself. I know. I'm there too. You never have. And, there's a certain balance I think that you have to have. You can go crazy. Okay, but I think we're talking about here not neglecting the important for the things that are just calling us out. the culture that we live in. And so we've got to be intentional and go, yes, I do have time for you. I will, pinning cute houses and I don't know what people pin on Pinterest, but I have 39 boards, so I should know. But, I've spent my own time on Pinterest, but are we willing to say, this is not the time for that. This is the time for you, and I want to spend time with you, and I want to talk about how your day went, and just put the phone aside and quit, responding to text and have some FaceTime, real FaceTime with the people in your lives. I think nothing can replace that. Have you thought about goals that you would have for your own children? Have you thought about that and articulated it? Have you written it down? I don't think we have time to go through verses. Here are some that I think of. Okay, and they're all verses, and some of those verses are, of course, they're all great because they're all inspired, but some are more touching, I think, to me. My goals for my children, I want them to go to heaven and to be saved. I think Christian people, for the most part, want that for their children. We're not going to read all those verses, but if you email me, I'll send them to you if you need them. To have full confidence and faith in God. That is a great verse, but I can't think exactly what it says right now. To prosper in all they do. To have wisdom in decision making. To be an example and a blessing to other people. That's not an exhaustive list, obviously. But those are some things that I thought of that I want for my children. And I would love to hear what some of yours are, and if we could talk about that at some point, but not now, because time is going fast. We'll go back to that if anybody wants to write those down afterwards. This is just something from one of the books in your resources talking about a spiritual legacy. I'm just going to read it, and because we are running out of time. Acknowledges and reinforces spiritual realities, okay? Thinking about the Word, speaking it, talking about it. Views God as a personal, caring being who is to be both loved and respected. Okay, there's no double talk coming out. We're not saying one thing and living another way. Make spiritual activities a routine aspect of life. Okay, consistency, I think, in that regard. I see that myself a lot with a lot of people, letting a lot of other things come in the way, or we just didn't feel like it, or it's late, or it's been, that I truly, this is one area that my parents did so right, because it was never an option. Even when I was home this past weekend, my dad had just come home from triple bypass and nearly dying, and he insisted that my mom and I go to church Sunday morning and Sunday night, and we didn't want to leave him by himself at that point, but we went because there's no other way to do it, as he sees it. Okay, talks about spiritual issues as a means of reinforcing spiritual commitments. Clarifies timeless truth, right and wrong, and incorporates spiritual principles into daily living. A lot of the things that we've already articulated in that. But think about it being a legacy, and what legacy are you going to leave? Okay, with your children and grandchildren, and not just family, but whoever you do have influence over. All right. Unfortunately, there are no guarantees. As I said, if we could just bottle it up and guarantee you that your children would grow up and live right and do right, we can all retire. But there is that problematic proverb, isn't there, that people always throw back at you. Train up a child in the way it should go, and his own will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. What do you do with that? What is your response, and how do you reconcile that proverb to, because you know a lot of people who've done everything they know to do right. They've been faithful people, they've been prayerful people, and it just didn't get passed on. Yeah.
Well, number one, when you put it in just that narrow context, you're taking that child's free will.
That's right.
It's the parents teaching, but the child has free will, just the same as the parent does. So you have to, because there's been a lot of Christian families that parents that taught their children and they took them to church. They didn't send them, they took them, but yet something happened and they grew away. But most, or not, a lot of them, when they do get old, they realize they've gone wrong and they do come back. But you got to give the child a free will.
That's right. And there are two things I think about with that. One is, I think of it like passing up time. If you're running not a runner, I probably didn't need to say that, you probably can tell, but if you're running like a relay and you have to pass the baton to the next runner. The passing of the baton is an important part of the race, from what they tell me at least, because it's easy to drop and not get exchanged from one hand to the other, okay? But there's a responsibility in the person accepting the baton. I think that's what you're saying. You know, that person who has the baton, that parent who's passing that baton of faith on to that next generation, may be doing everything in their power and with great faith doing it, you know. But if that person doesn't take it or doesn't, you know, there's responsibility there also. Also, let me just say, it's a proverb, okay? Proverbs are generally true statements. Generally, that is true. If you raise your children and you train them up in the way that they should go when they're old, generally that is true. Of course, there are exceptions. Flip over and read other proverbs. You'll see some that you go, well, you know, that may depend, because they're proverbs. Okay, so that's how I, in my head, kind of reconcile those. We're going to wrap it up with a few last verses. 1 Corinthians 15:58. For some reason, I typed this one verse out, so I'll just read it and we'll look it up. Stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Okay, let that be our reminder to stay the course, to keep working at it, to keep praying, to keep being faithful. Okay, when those times come. Philippians 2:13 tells us it's God who gives us the will. You know, so if you're not feeling it, you can pray about, God, I need the desire, I need the passion to do this, to get up and do it. Philippians 2:13, if you want to write that down. And then I'll just go back to that Isaiah 55:10 that says, you know, God's words are not going to come back to him empty. And let him use us to speak the word and to be arms and legs here on earth and to be that vessel to pass that on to the next generation. And he says it's not going to come back to me empty. If I'm reading those verses for what I think it says, let me throw out one other application for this, and we're going to call it a day. I have a little pet peeve. And let me name some things and you tell me what these things have in common. Okay? What are you growing in your Christian garden? Cooking up Christianity. What kind of shoe or hat or whatever are you, or anything that involves aprons or quilts? What do those things all have in common? There's nothing wrong with this, by the way.
Ladies' Day thing.
Ladies' Day things. Popular Ladies' Day things. Okay? Nothing wrong with a theme. Nothing. I'm a huge love a theme. Sometimes I feel like when we do things as ladies, though, this is an example of dumbing it down. We have an idea and we don't have a message. You know? And so I just want, because I know in this room, because you raised your hands and I suspected it anyway, you're in a lot of the planning and a lot of the, you know, you have a voice when it comes to the kinds of things that we do just as women. Let's raise the bar. Let's dig deeper. Let's call people to something else. Let's call ourselves to something else. We can handle it. Okay, that whole craving the meat, not the milk, is not exclusive to 49% of the population. Okay, we can be smart and be submissive at the same time. Okay, those are not mutually exclusive. And so I just say, whatever your sphere of influence is, and if you are planning things for ladies, let's raise the bar. And fine to have a theme, but let's have a message. Let's have something in Scripture that calls us to live and to do differently. Okay, I am done, and I hope that something that I said inspired, and I hope it turned out to be positive and not negative given the title and the statistics at the beginning.